Welcome, welcome, welcome. Table Crashers, episode 50, guys. 50, we made it. Yes. How do you feel about that, Brent, being part of episode 50 here at Table Crashers?
Feel pretty great. That's a good number. I was a math major in college, so numbers are a big thing for me. So
numbers are a big thing.
Big thing.
That kind of ties into game design, I would suppose. But before we get into that, this is Brent Keath from Flannel Games. His game is currently on Kickstarter. The game is Furtherance. That will be sort of going to the table, crashing the table later in the episode. So you guys will be able to see that. But Brent, we have you here for the interview portion, and this is your first game design. Official, let's call it official. So what got you into board game design?
So I've been playing board games ever since I was little. I remember my brother was playing Pokemon, and I really wanted to play with him, but I was 6 years old and didn't know how to read the cards. So he said, "I won't play with you until you learn how to read." So I quickly learned how to read just so I could play Pokemon with him. And I still remember the day I picked up a card and said, "Hey, I want to play." And he said, "No, not until you learn how to read." And I said, "I can read." And I read the card to him. So gaming has always been a huge thing for me. And so in college, I made a few games just for fun. I always use the Game Crafter to print them off because you can print one copy pretty cheap through them.
Right.
But Furtherance was the first one that I made it. I showed it to my friends, and my friends were like, "You've got something here. This is a great game. I would love to have a copy." So that kind of just let it take off a little bit more. So I've definitely put more time and effort into this project than anyone before. And this is the first one that I'm actually selling. So, yeah.
Now, was Furtherance, how long ago was that you did this? Started the formulating Furtherance?
Yeah, so Furtherance as an idea started in 2015.
Okay.
So it's been, it was fall 2015. So it's been 3.5 years now. Been working on Furtherance. Yeah.
Excellent. So when, now I guess what I would ask at this point is what was the transition like? Was it something that you started at the kitchen table, just sort of put it together on index cards, and your friends would come over and you guys would play Furtherance? Is that where it all started for you?
So Furtherance actually started on a piece of graph paper when I was first thinking about it. The reason it came up in the first place was that me and my friends played a lot of Civilization online, and the games just took so long and we never finished them. And we wanted something that was more simplistic and had a little bit more player interaction, because we found we could play a whole game without ever even running into each other on the map. So that's kind of how Furtherance came about to begin with. So from there, it started on a piece of graph paper. Then I wrote out all the cards on note cards and bought this giant box, which I cut into a board and wrote on with Sharpie. And then from there, I ordered a poster and printed out a bunch of cards off the school printer. I got permission from someone I was working for at the time to do that. And then from there, I started ordering prototypes from Game Crafter. So we've been through about 6 or 7 prototype copies now over the years. So.
Okay. I have to go back a second because you mentioned the reading cards, and your brother won't let you play Pokemon unless you read the cards. I think that's really cool because I find, as myself, as a father now, my son's 3.5, he's going to be 4, and he wants to play games already. Like I get a new game in, and he wants to take all the components out and roll the dice and do anything he can with that game, but he just obviously doesn't understand how they work. He just wants to be a part of what daddy's doing a lot of the time, and he likes throwing dice around. Actually, point of fact, I think there's like 10 dice on my floor in my office right now because he just throws them around the house, which is why he can't play Sagrada with me, because the dice go missing. But in that position, so in the position of a younger brother, that's crazy motivation for you to just learn how to read to play Pokemon. How old were you at that point? How old? I'm sorry, you cut out. 6 years old? Yeah. So that's some pretty good determination.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. And so as soon as you can read, he was cool with that. He was like, "All right, now you can play because you can read." Or was there still like some little hitches to that whole solution?
Oh, there were definitely little hitches. It was definitely something that, oh, I want an excuse not to have to spend all this time with my little brother. Oh, he can't read. I don't want to read the cards to him. So then I fought this hard to learn how to do it. And then he's like, now I don't know what to do. So we definitely played a lot, but not as often as I wanted to, obviously.
Of course.
So.
Of course. How much older was your brother than you?
He's 5.5 years older than I am.
Oh, okay. So significantly older. I can understand that then. He want to play with a baby, right? But could you walk me through your design process?
As I mentioned before, basically I started with a piece of graph paper. From there, I basically test it with anyone who's willing to sit down with me. Oftentimes I'll go through 2-player modes myself, if possible, to just kind of play it off myself, see if there's anything I can find that makes it unbalanced or anything like that. My background in high school, I was captain of my chess team, surprise, surprise. And I often played that with myself. So I have a lot of experience playing one-on-one games in order to kind of learn how a game works. So that can help me a lot with the balancing of the game as I go through. But I try to pull aside anybody I can to try to go through the game. Thankfully, I have a lot of friends who are willing to help me play test. So yeah, I start there. I get a lot of play tests through. I kind of work my way through the various iterations. Once I get a lot of play tests, if people are confident about the game, that's when I reached out to the artist that we used. We had 2 artists, both from the US, Elizabeth Gass, who I went to college with, and Michael Logston, who I met through a mutual friend in college. They're both amazing artists, and I contacted them somewhat early on in the process. Once I realized that we had something with Furtherance, and they both did all the art and they did an amazing job.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the next step in that. And then while they were working on that, I worked on marketing and kind of messing with a lot of the design elements of the game. I like to play around with stuff. I'll often throw in stuff to a game to mix it up and see how people react to it, and see which mechanics people are really drawn to and really attached to. That helps a lot in the design process. I also really like sitting and just kind of watching people play the game. There's a lot you can find in people's like eye movements. We even found when we first made the board of the game, we put the player sections on the right side of the board, and everyone, when they sat down, looked to their left. And it was something that we didn't even consider when we were first building the board. But as soon as we started playtesting it, they normally didn't comment on it, but I'd see it. Their head would just go to the left instantly when they sat down at their place. So we ended up moving it over to the left. So just small things like that I know make a huge difference long term in the playability of the game. So a lot of testing. And of course, now we're in the marketing phase. So now the Kickstarter's launched. We did a lot of pre-marketing, went to a lot of conventions, and continued to, of course, play test the game, get more feedback, tried to improve some of the graphic design elements of the art with the cards, tried to make everything as intuitive as we possibly could.
Of course, yeah.
We actually had one thing. The font that we originally chose was a little bit of a comic-y font because the art has kind of a comic-ish style.
Yeah.
You're already laughing at it because you realize my mistake. And another mistake that I made was when I first designed the cards, I designed them all in Photoshop. So I went through the painstaking process of designing each individual card. So I had to go back through, and thankfully, when I redesigned them, I did it in InDesign. So if I have to make a change like that again, I can do it in like 30 minutes to an hour versus having to redo all of that. Took me probably 3 or 4 days. So I definitely learned a lot through the process.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, there's a lot of things that you're saying that, through doing this show and through attending a bunch of conventions over the last couple of years, getting to know a lot of designers that are involved in the thick of design right now. A lot of things you said just now really hit a lot of those points of like the learning process. 99% of game testing is you have to be at the table and you have to watch how people are playing, because they could say anything they want. The power of observation on you, the power of observation on you, as a designer is very important. That's a very key tool in the tool chest of a game designer, is being able to sort of pick on the subtleties of what people aren't saying, the nonverbal language for feedback. So right there in design, that's like one of the major tools in a design tool chest. So it seems that you've hit some bumps, but you've sort of like got up, brushed off, and you're like, okay, I know that I have to re-edit all these photos, but I'll knuckle down and I'll do it. I'll get through it.
Yep.
And I did laugh at the Comic-y thing, because Comic Sans is probably like the murder text of like
it
anybody
wasn't
involved.
Comic Sans, but it was in that direction.
Doesn't matter.
I know.
If it has the smell of Comic Sans, then people are gonna they pick up on it. Any Comic-y thing. But yeah, so it seems that your process was rough to begin with, because obviously it's your first design. What resources did you reach out to throughout this? Because obviously when you hit a bump or you weren't sure, where did you find the best information as a new designer to keep you moving forward?
Ton of resources available. Pangea Games puts out a good blog. Jamie Stegmaier from Stonemaier Games
Brandon
puts
Rollins,
out an amazing blog. But most of all, I found that conventions, just meeting other game designers, was a huge thing, because they've already been through the process. They've been through all these things. They know what tools they've used in the past. And something about the board game design community that's different than any other professional community I've been a part of is that everyone is so willing to help everybody else. It does not feel like a competitive environment by any means. Everyone wants everyone else to succeed, and they're all willing to share information, to take an hour to sit down and help you with your game or take a look at it, to answer any questions you have. And so there have been tons of amazing people. Bob and Ryan from One Day West Games have been awesome. Dan from DPH Games have been awesome. I mean, the list goes on of people who have just been super supportive and super helpful, and have just, helped make the design process a lot easier, and have been great resources for me to go, hey, I don't quite get this. Can you kind of point me in the right direction or give me advice on what you did? Or
and the funny thing is, there are blogs, there's the resources are there, they're spread out. And there's a fair amount of a fair share of hunting you have to do to actually get the information you need. I definitely found in my process, especially leading into Kickstarter, because Kickstarter is a whole different beast. And then the other funny thing is, like, there's some shared commonalities, but there's also pitching to a publisher. Taking the other, because right now there's essentially two routes. You self-publish by going the Kickstarter route, or you find a publisher. But each of those have some of the design stuff sort of has overlap, but then when you get to the marketing and that world, it's a completely different monster. Yeah. Did you try both paths? Did you actually do like sell sheets and pitching, or did you go right and say, I'm going to self-publish this, I'm going to take care of it?
I did preliminary talk to a few publishers. However, a lot of them didn't like the fact that Furtherance is only up to 4 players, which is understandable. A lot of them want to branch out and have more higher player counts with their games. And then there were also a lot that said, since I was a new designer, they were less inclined to publish the game.
Interesting.
So those things definitely discouraged me from leaning toward publishers. And I also have an MBA in IT management, and I've done a lot of business things within my job. So I'm very familiar with how to run a company. I ran an app development company in college. So I know about customer acquisition cost and a lot of the business side of things, which is funny because now that I'm getting into the Kickstarter and I'm starting to do some of that marketing, a lot of this part of it is more familiar to me from running businesses in the past. So it definitely is strange, because there's definitely been this transition from starting the Kickstarter of, I was trying to kind of build up an audience before, show off the game, get feedback. Well, now I'm selling. Now I'm at that point where I have to look at all the numbers and analyze things and get referral links and figure out all those details, which I'm much more familiar with. Yeah, all the different hats, right, that you end up having to wear. That's usually what people go to when they talk about being involved in design is just the hats that you wear. And then usually the next step, if you decide to stay a designer and become your own self-publishing company,
then they usually say things like, okay, well, I got rid of a hat, but now somebody else wears it, and I have to figure out how to control them. And so yeah, I some of the work was gone, but now I also have the manager hat that I now have to manage all these other hats. So, what else has been your experience? You said that the design community has been pretty open and inviting for you as a new designer. What are some of the other experiences you can sort of extol on somebody who might be fresh out of a prototype and like, oh, wide-eyed, and okay, I want to go at it. I'm going to make this a game now. I have a bottle cap and this little scrunchie, and I'm making a game. What would you say? What kind of advice would you give to them?
It's actually kind of funny that you bring this up now, because just the other day, my brother-in-law reached out to me and is like, hey, I have this game and I think it's done. Like, I think it's perfect. Mm-hmm. What's my next step? And basically the advice I told him was, you think it's done, but I want you to take it to 15 strangers and play it with them and see what they think about it. Yep. Because I know that right now he's only played it with friends and family. Yep. So friends and family they aren't going to give you as good of feedback. And especially within the board game community, board gamers are the ones who buy games. So they are the ones you want play testing your games. You can get any Joe Schmo off the street to play your game. They're not going to be able to give quite as good of feedback as a board gamer, because that's your target market. You got to go to that section. So I told him to go to a board game store, and find people who play board games and have them play his game and give some feedback. Once he gets that to a better place after those play tests, I recommended he reach out and start getting some art designed for it. One thing that a lot of people will tell you in the board game community is that a lot of artists kind of have their own timelines. It can take a while to get art out there. So I do recommend, if you're solid about going with the game, to get art early. Also, of course, if you're going either publisher or Kickstarter, you got to have some art up front to show off, whether it's on your sell sheet or through Kickstarter.
And to that point, there's a separation in art too, which maybe people don't understand. There's the graphic design side of a game creation, and then there's the actual illustrations or background art. Your art elements of the lore or the background of your game is a whole different entity than the graphic design. And the art you can get early, because if you already know what your world is about, you already know what your theme is about, at least you have a good idea. It's okay to invest in that art early, but don't start investing in graphic design until you've tested this thing through and through.
Agreed.
Because you can fork out money for graphic design, and then all of a sudden 6 months down the road, people don't like anything about what you've created. Well, I shouldn't say that. They don't like elements of it. So then you have to scrap everything you did on those cards or the game board, and all that money you invested in that graphic design was essentially wasted. So yes, I agree. Early art investment, but don't go too heavy into graphic design until late stages.
Good distinction. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
And that's the other funny thing too. And I'm sure I'll ping you for this. I'll ask you this question. But when you're like, how much of the graphic design did you take upon yourself? Because a lot of first time game creators or self publishers usually take a lot of that on their back, and it's mixed, because I'll go from my perspective. I know that when I was doing it, it wasn't going to be as good as if I paid an artist to do it, because I don't have the eye for it. I knew it would be okay, but I knew that there's a gap in my understanding of how to do that. Where did you come from that, or did you ping somebody for the graphic stuff, or did you take it all upon yourself?
Started off taking it all upon myself, and quickly realized that I don't have enough of an eye for it to do it by myself. So I then started having our artists help out with some of those things. However, graphic design and art, as you mentioned before, is kind of a little bit of a different skill set. So we still got a few comments after that. The art is great, but the graphic design isn't. So we had to get in touch with another graphic designer for that stuff. So we're still doing a few minor touch-ups to that, just because now the game is complete. So some of the graphic design can be tweaked at this point.
Of course.
But for the most part, yeah, our artists did most of the graphic design, except on the Kickstarter page. The banners were made by our artists. I did the design for the Kickstarter page. So far, it seems to be doing well. And I did, but I probably should have hired a graphic designer for it, just because I know there's a multiplicative effect, right? When I market using Board Game Geek ads or whatever, the appearance of my page is multiple. Like it has an impact on how many of those people back. So it probably would have been worthwhile, but my marketing budget was starting to get up there, so I tried to cut some costs by doing it myself, and so that's where we're at.
But it's funny too that there's another thing that you sort of discovered through this process is well, did I, because going into Kickstarter you're like, okay, check, I'm good for that, I'm good for this, and then after launch you're like, I probably getting more clicks if I brought somebody in to make this pop a little bit more, it's crazy. It is crazy because self-publishers, most of the time, all of the time I've encountered thus far, a self-publisher is a designer at the core of what they are or who they are, which usually analytical, mathematic, so many attributes that really don't always jive with art and art creation. Now, I know there's the whole argument, you could still be an artist and be analytical, and I agree, but I think overall the type of brain operation that goes into most game design doesn't jive as well with a creative force. And it's really funny because almost everybody who's creating these games or designing these games, they get to that stage where they're like, I could do this. I could take care of all the game is perfect already. When people play it, it won't matter what it looks like. And then they get it on the table in front of, like you said, 15 complete strangers, and almost everybody that walks away from that table is like, hey man, the game was pretty fun, but is this what it's going to look like in the end? How many times it happened to me? How many times has it happened to you in that process?
Definitely in the earlier process, it happened a lot. Recently we've been good. I still want to make a few minor graphic design changes, but pretty much all the places we've gone recently, their question is this for sale? Where can I buy this? Which is good because that's exactly what you want when they see the art. You want them to have this is finished, rather than this still needs a few touch-ups, or this is obviously a prototype. Which that's another thing I learned, was that it's good when you're at that phase where you're starting to market for your Kickstarter, it's worthwhile to invest in quality prototypes. Because that has a huge impact on people as to seeing what the final game is going to look like, or something close to the final game, rather than seeing something that's obviously a prototype. So
and I think there's also possibly a distinction there too. If you sit with designers and they play test the game, they don't really care as much with the way it looks. If you go to like an Unpub, or if you go to like a Proto-Spiel, you're going to sit down with those guys and they're going to be like, most of them are going to have like paper clips and nickels, and like index cards, and everybody there is cool with that. Then the feedback you'll get will be around the design of the game, which really helps you work mechanically with it. But when you go to like a PAX Unplugged and you go to more of a general audience of board gamers, then you're going to get the visual feedback that you didn't get early on. So it's funny because there's these stages of testing that happen, and like you said, I think you've encountered them. Like in these late stage ones, when you're going to conventions, you're getting that mix of designers and the regular Joe board game person, right?
Yeah.
So let's have a little, PAX Unplugged, phenomenal. Also, we're gonna double plug Portal Game Store in southern Pennsylvania, or what is it, southeastern Pennsylvania?
Yeah, it's over near Allentown, over in Bethlehem. Yeah.
I met Brent there at their game day. They do a game day twice a year, or more.
And we actually just had our Furtherance launch party yesterday there. When we launched the Kickstarter, we did a launch party there. So
awesome.
They were great.
How was that? How did the launch party? Now, because you don't really hear a lot of people that do launch parties for Kickstarter. How did that go?
Thankfully there was another event going on too, and we were able to pull some of those people in. We bought way too many snacks, as I'm akin to do whenever I have any sort of party. So of course we have plenty left that we'll probably take to other events throughout the next month.
Yeah.
but yeah, it went really well, and yeah, people were playing it and they were liking it, and one of them backed it right away, and yeah,
Awesome.
it's also really nice to have the Kickstarter there, because it's one thing to say, oh, you will be able to do this thing. It's another to say, you can go there now, you can do this now. And so I'm noticing that's kind of a different feel. At least for yesterday it was. So I'm curious as we go to more events throughout the month how that's going to look. So
were you like a little creeping buzzard, like over the shoulder, like, hey, why don't you back that? It's right there, right there, right there.
Of course not.
If you like it so much, why don't you back it?
Yeah, Dan talks about that a lot. So many people walk up, this game looks amazing, and then they just walk away without buying a copy.
Yeah. Dan from DPH definitely has gone through some of those pains. I can tell you that much. So, to jump into the more fun stuff here, what is your personal favorite game mechanic?
Game mechanic. Oh, that's so hard. For games right now, that's really what I'm kind of digging. Root, Villainous.
Okay. You cut out in the beginning part. You said asynchronous.
Asymmetric games.
Asymmetric. Yeah. So I'm gonna pause for a second, and I'm gonna ask you, because Villainous. You like Villainous?
And I see people, like, there's so many people who like hate it or love it or whatever.
This is more of a personal thing for me. This is not a Table Crashers community. This is not a Geek Spiel community thing. This is more a Will thing. So don't hate on Table Crashers for the opinions that I might express during this part of the conversation. But Villainous, you like Villainous?
Do like Villainous, and I'm guessing you hate Villainous based on your surprise of me liking it.
The only thing that bothers me about Villainous and what is that everybody has to know every other character. You have to have a knowing knowledge. So you have to enter the game with almost an encyclopedic knowledge of everything you're going up against before the game even begins. You can't really adapt to what's the other person is playing without actually like picking up their card and reading what their objectives are. And I don't really, I don't like that type of game, because I like a game that I could just sit down and then I don't have to know anything before the game to be able to compete in that game. When I have to know, like, honestly, because my wife and I bought it, and she's a huge Diz nerd, and we were both excited. The components were really cool, and then we opened the box, we started playing, and both of us sort of at the end of the game were just like, she was super frustrated. I wasn't really confused per se, but I was just like, meh, I had that feeling where, and she was like, I just didn't understand what I had to do to get you. And I was like, well, you had to sort of read my card, and then I had to know what your stuff did. And then we sort of came to the conclusion, the kind of players we are, it would have been like 20 games in before we were both comfortable enough to be like, feel like we were legitimately competing in that game.
That would be any asymmetric game. I mean, I don't know if you played Root yet.
No, but that's one of the reasons I've been avoiding it, honestly.
Yeah. So the more you know about the game, the better. And I mean, as I mentioned before, I grew up playing Pokemon. I've played so many trading card games, Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh! I even played Star Wars miniatures for a period of time. So all of those games are, your opponent's going to play a card from a pool of thousands of cards. And when I played those games, I knew all of the cards. So to me, an asymmetric game like Villainous or Root is easy to be able to familiarize myself with the cards that are there. Right. So I think that's why I like them, is because that familiarity does help you along. Yeah, because asymmetric player powers don't bother me. When you as a player have like one or two powers that I don't, and vice versa, that doesn't bother me because I could sort of see it in a snapshot, right? But yeah, so like what sort of kills me is like, but it's interesting that you mentioned that, because you're right. Collectible card games, trade card games, living card games, most of them have like these pools of thousands of different combinations. I guess when I sit down for a board game, I'm not looking for that experience. If I'm sitting down for a collectible card game, then it's like, of course, that's what I'm here for. But I've never been a huge deck builder. I'll like take a root or a base of a deck and then build upon it. Gotcha. So yeah, that's anyway, because I'm a huge Magic fan, especially like commander decks and stuff like that. But I always play for more of the randomness. Like
And that's what Commander does. Like I'm going to pull a card out of like 100 different cards in my deck, and let's see what this does.
Okay.
And if I play like standard or competitive, like modern or legacy, I'm playing like the fastest burn deck I can because I don't want to have to time my plays. That's just a little bit of will. There you go. Sorry. We went down that path. But so that's where your favorite type of game lies at this point.
Right now,
Mechanic.
yeah, I'd say. Yeah.
What is your guilty pleasure game?
My guilty pleasure game.
Mm-hmm.
I don't quite know what you mean by that.
What is the one game that you enjoy that you know that other people within the game community would sort of frown upon?
You cut out there for a second.
What is the one game that you enjoy, or few games that you enjoy, that if your other gamer friend sat down, they just sort of look at you like, really, that you like that game?
Actually, Villainous right now. Villainous is that game right now, because so many people, even people who don't like, even people who like asymmetric games, a lot of my friends have been complaining that the Villainous player powers are very unbalanced.
Right.
Which they might be. And in the 2 games I've played, everyone was 1 turn away from winning, so I haven't experienced that yet. But I might soon, and maybe I'll hate it once I do, or I realize how the strategies work, or whatever. But yeah, normally when I say Villainous, people have a similar reaction to what you had of like, really, Villainous?
That one day you'll sit down and you'll be like, oh, that's why people don't like this game.
and I haven't bought it yet. So
okay.
Yeah, so I'm good if that does happen. But as of right now, if I see it at a game day, I'll normally pick it up and try to play it.
Absolutely. What are your future plans? Obviously, if funding or no funding, whatever happens with the Kickstarter, because it's a wild, wild land out there right now. I think you'll agree, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, definitely.
It's just crazy. What like how many games are like funding ridiculous amounts of money, and then how many games are just making it, and then how many aren't even. It's the Wild West. It's the Wild West of board games right now. What are your future plans here? Like, what are your convention plans? What is the rest of your year mapped out look like? Just in case anybody catches this interview and they want to meet you face to face and shake your hand.
So right now we're still looking at where we're going to go this year. We're definitely going to go back to the ones we went to in the fall. We're going to be at PAX Unplugged. We're going to be at Save Against Fear. The one thing is Furtherance is set to deliver in November. So we're going to have our prototypes and we'll probably be showing them off, but we won't really have anything to sell at conventions. Right. So we'll probably just go as players. So people might see us and might meet us. But I don't have too much in the works as far as the company's concerned. We have one other game that we're working on. And basically if Furtherance doesn't succeed, it's a card game. It has a lot less components. So I would like to try to go back to Kickstarter with that one. Obviously I want Furtherance to succeed. I want it to fund, and I want that to go well. But if it doesn't, the plan is to jump over to that card game, try to build an audience and support for that. Cause it's smaller. We can have a smaller funding goal. It won't have as high of costs for manufacturing and everything like that. So we can have a smaller barrier to entry, start with that, and then come back to Furtherance once that's complete, and utilize the audience that we get for that game in order to help kickstart another Kickstarter for Furtherance. So currently that's the plan. As of right now, or at least right before I checked before this, we're at $1,560 from our $4,000 goal on Kickstarter. So far so good. Tomorrow, Crowdfunding Weekly on Board Game Geek will go out with Furtherance in it. So hopefully that'll get us 1 or 2 more backers as well. Yeah. So yeah, pushing and hoping that it succeeds. But if it doesn't, we do have a backup plan. If it does, then we will still probably proceed with that next game, and continue to make more games from there. We have a lot kind of in the pipeline. So if that pipeline keeps building, I may go with a publisher for 1 or 2 of the games, because I can't do this with 5 games a year or anything like that. Of course. Hopefully having designed Furtherance and or 1 or 2 more games, that'll help when I reach out to publishers to establish me as a designer that they might be interested in.
Very true. Yeah, you're building up a bit of a portfolio by getting funding. Very good. Excellent. So are you ready to crash the table? Yeah?
Yes, I think I am.
All right. Excellent.
Table.
So thank you for joining us for the interview. And let's go head over to the table.